Straight into our next speaker, which is podcast marketing insights and strategies for success.
So today we're going to be talking about podcast marketing. In case you made a mistake, as this is not the right place, you're still on time. But a little bit about me to know who's speaking. So my name is Sara. I'm a Chief Growth Officer at Media Bodies, which is an influencer and podcast marketing agency. I fell in love with the gaming industry 13 years ago. I have a few exes, Social Point, FunPlus, and Bandai Namco. Recently I joined Media Bodies. Through these years, one of my biggest areas of expertise has been how to track these non-conventional user acquisition channels. So basically focusing on how we can crack the code, how can we track this, and how can we make it efficient for a proper marketing mix. So a little bit of a summary of what we're going to be seeing today. Some of the latest data about podcast marketing. Why podcast? Why is it interesting? How to set up a campaign, and then how to measure and how we can optimize it. So to jump in some of the latest data on podcast marketing, we can say that the ad spend on podcast marketing has been increasing year over year by an average of 22%. At the same time, on 2024, the ad load went from 6.44% to 7.19%, which means the ad load, so you have an idea, it's the ads per episode that we can find. So this has been increasing as well. Specifically on the gaming spend, quarter over quarter, this has been increasing 3.6 times. And something that I like to look at, it's what Gen Zs are doing. Me, I'm a millennial, so I don't know much about them. And what I do know is that they are the trendsetters, they are internet generation, so following maybe what they're following, it can be a good hint for us. So basically, this is some Spotify information. But so basically following what Gen Zs are doing, like they say that 61% of the monthly podcast listeners that are Gen Zs, they wanted the product or a service after hearing a podcast ad. 44% said that they used a promotional code from a podcast ad, and 43% purchased a product or a service, and 42% they recommended to friends and family. Which I think is very interesting data. Basically, podcast, it's a fast-growing medium, and so it really makes it forward-looking investment. So it's definitely that we want something to be looking at and to follow closely. So why podcast? So many companies have been saying that they've been shifting a little bit on their marketing mix from pure performance channels to non-traditional user acquisition channels to diversify a little bit their strategies and to make sure that they put less reliance on the traditional core channels. So usually we have the core performance channels, which TikTok, well, let's see, Google, Facebook, and in-app ads. Then we can support this in our marketing mix as well with some engagement channels, which is like longer formats, more interactive community building, such as Twitch or YouTube gaming. And then we have, and Reddit, and then we have advocacy channels, which that can be podcast and influencer marketing, which basically they help to bridge the bridge between performance and engagement channels, which is still measurable, and basically it can deliver a very trusted messaging. So in my opinion, it's very 2019 just to stick with the core channels. Like there's many companies that they've been struggling, like they have one hit game since many years, and now UA, it's an uphill battle. CPIs are going up, users are going down, and so basically to diversify and to try to find ways to basically leverage your brand to be out there in a different way and so on. It's something that it's working very, very well, and there's many companies that are realizing this, and so that's why they are expanding their marketing mix. But let's say we decide we want to kick off a podcast campaign. What do we have to do? So first of all, we need to have very, very clear goals. Why? Because sometimes, like, it's true that we might be like, oh yeah, maybe I want to try this, but I don't know exactly what I want to expect from it. So basically, making sure that we know our goal, if it's user acquisition, if it's brand awareness, and then of course for the budget, same, like, oh, I have some spare budget, I don't know where to allocate it. Maybe I could test it here or there. But we need to be very, very clear on how relevant this budget is for our goal. And also we need to be very certain that if this budget is going to be good to move the needle for our product. Like if we have a product that has like already big installs in the US, like a large number of installs in the US, like we cannot just spend some peanuts because of course like, we're not going to be able to move the needle. So we need to make sure that the budget that we're spending is relevant for it. And it's obvious, but as well for the target audience that it's aligned with your goals, and the target audience that it's aligned with your product. And then of course creative. So for podcast we only have the audio. It's very important that like all the elements that contribute to the creative are as well very well thought, such as the call to action, the tone of voice, etc., etc. And finally, when we have all of this very clear, we can finally set up the campaign. And we can guide you through, okay, what's the genre and the audience targeting of the campaign, what's the ad placement and budget allocation, and finally, how the attribution and the tracking is gonna look like. But speaking about attribution and tracking, we can jump into the understanding how the campaign measurement works, which is something as well, like maybe have it clear beforehand. So some of the attribution methods, basically podcast goes, it's like an IP device matching, so basically it's a probabilistic attribution that we can enhance through other ways such as promo codes or URLs to have a more deterministic approach as well and to basically be able to compare the data. And finally, there's many companies that also they choose to double check the data as well with an in-house analysis. So if you have these capabilities is also great. In terms of granularity, basically podcasts, they can target geo and demo segmentation, but at the same time, I don't know if any of you has run CTV, which is mostly a household level, but in podcast marketing, it's at a listener level. Some tech considerations to have very clear as well before starting. So knowing that the attribution window, it might vary from what we're used to. So up to 30 days, it can be a good attribution window for podcast marketing. Why? Because it has a longer shelf life. So for example, there's, I download a podcast and I don't listen to it now. I'm gonna listen to it like in 10 days. So we need to make sure that we have this in mind as well. And some of the data tools that are going to be useful for us to know, to measure the campaign, to know how everything has been working. So there's like Spotify Analytics, which is the one that probably is more popular, but there are others that have very similar ways of measuring with some little differences here and there. But all of them work with a pixel tracking, and basically this can help us to leverage our campaign by optimizing it through and having all the KPIs that through the pixel tracking we can get. So ROAS, conversion rate, CPIs, average revenue per user, whatever that can be. And ultimately, this can also help us to iterate in terms of creatives. So how can we optimize? What are the areas that we can optimize in a podcast campaign? So obviously the audience targeting. We will deliver like a detailed analysis and report about it. And so basically we will identify what are the geos and what is the demographics that are working better for your product. In terms of verticals or shows, if it's, I don't know, you have a female game and true crime, it's usually one of the verticals that is performing better. So we will also have an extensive KPI report on what's been working better for each one of the verticals. So you have like not just an overview, but also like detailed information on each one of the KPIs and how each one of them has been impacted by many elements. On the creative and ad format, we also analyze the creatives that you had. So if it's an audio, there's many ways that we can dissect your ad. So for example, the tone of voice, the talking points, the voice type, the ad length, what type of call to action, things like this. And so basically we put together a creative report that will tell you which elements are impacting the KPIs by vertical. And of course the ad placement. When we talk about placement, it means many things. So either it's a baked-in ad for a longer period campaign, or if it's a dynamic ad, at the same time we can also run programmatic or non-programmatic for a more hand-picked approach. And so all of these are things that we can basically tailor for the following media plan to tell you how the campaign has been performing, and then optimize towards that direction as well. In terms of tracking, there's many people that probably for podcasts it's something very new, but maybe they're more comfortable with influencer marketing. So there's, I don't know if you heard, but there's, it's growing. There's the podcasts that are seen on YouTube, so basically are recorded, right? And it's a medium that it's growing a lot as well. So I don't know if you've done any influencer marketing, but it's also very interesting because some companies, they're more comfortable doing this first before trying just like regular podcast. Adding a tracking link in a video in YouTube, and then basically you can just treat it as if it was influencer marketing. It's also a very good choice to start. And so it's a way of also giving it a more deterministic approach. As we said, that podcast, mainly, it's going to be probabilistically attributed. And then finally, with all these elements, we're going to be having them into considerations to have a tailored media plan, and to make sure that we are allocating everything accordingly to your needs and to your product. And this is to finalize, this is just an example of a casual mobile game. This is a client of us. We cannot disclose the name, but basically this is an example on how we've been tracking. Like we've been working for them for the past 2 years, with them for the past 2 years on a monthly basis. They've been running podcast campaigns, and so here, as you can see, how we've been hitting the target ROI and exceeding it. Month over month, except for just 1 month in June. And then this is an example of what I was saying when we're talking about creative report. So this is, for example, how the tone of voice is impacting the conversion rate. So we can see, okay, lighthearted, informative, casual, and so what type of tone of voice is impacting this better. And so with this, we can do it with many other elements, and that's what we do. And basically, at the end of it, what we want to have is something like this. So for example, we have verticals like true crime or comedy, and then we can see, okay, what is the ad formula that works better for the average revenue per user for each one of the verticals. It's what type of talking points are working better as well. So the gameplay, personal experience, and maybe in comedy it's something different. And then looking into other KPIs, such as conversion rate, same verticals, but as well being able to tailor one ad per vertical and one ad also depending on what KPIs are the ones that are more important for you. So yeah, I don't know if you have any questions, but yeah, I hope it's clear, and I'll be around. If you also have any questions later, you can reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a great presentation. Quick question about the creatives. So is there a big difference, or do you have the host of the podcast actually read the ads as opposed to creating them separately with other voice actors?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the elements as well that we take into consideration where we're analyzing the ad. It can be host-read or produce-read, right? So basically, if you are producing the ad, either if it has music or not, like sometimes as well the host can add music or maybe not. So these are the things that we are analyzing. At the same time, how is it read? So for example, the tone of voice. It's definitely, these are definitely part of the thing that of the creatives that are impacting the creatives. And so we analyze everything together and everything separately, and then we can just have like proper formulas for each one of the verticals and each one of the KPIs, let's say.
Great, thanks.
I was wondering, is there much of a difference between ads that are in podcasts that are audio only, or as opposed to also video podcasts? Because I know for me, we do a podcast every week, and we found that once we switched to video, our numbers actually went up. So I don't know if there was a difference if people like to see who's talking.
So for what I know, the podcast on video, it's growing massively, and like YouTube said that actually the format it's big on Spotify, but it's even bigger on YouTube. And yeah, something that we've seen is that there's definitely like way more interaction when the podcast is on video as well. So usually how we track it, there's also like the pixel integrated, but at the same time there's a portion of the people that we can see how much people like they've watched or they listened to the podcast watching it, let's say. That makes sense. And it's definitely something that we've seen that, for example, because we are also an influencer marketing agency, we can compare how the impact that we are seeing on podcast, YouTube, and just regular influencer marketing campaign, how this compares. And what we can see is like it's very similar. And influencer marketing, like if the campaign is done right, like the impact it can be massive. So we believe that there's more interaction. It's a little bit more fluid in a way than just like having people listening into it. To us, it's a very recommended format, and we highly encourage people, especially if it's the first time that you're doing podcast, to try this formula as well.
Right, thank you so much. Can we have a big round? Oh, was another question? I think we've got time.
Thanks. Hi, that was a great presentation, by the way. Thank you. How do you find the podcasts to actually advertise in? I mean, yeah, where is there database lists of them, or?
Yeah, so there's publishers and networks, basically, and they have like their pool of their inventory of podcasts, of shows.
Like Spotify has a list of podcasts.
Spotify, it's one of them, but like there's publishers, probably you haven't heard the name, but like,
okay.
But it's like, yeah, there's like Sirius, there's at large, there's like a series of networks that basically they work with a huge network of Spotify podcast shows, and basically we hire them, and we have very good relationships with all of them, and basically it's kind of similar way on how influencer marketing works. Basically, like there's an agency that has a pool of influencers that they represent and everything, and then basically you're like, okay, we usually work with them, so we have special prices as well and things like that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks.
Thank
Can we
you.
have a big round of applause, please?